The rain from the night before still clung to the streets when Emily Grace Walker disappeared in the college town of Cookeville, Tennessee. Population, just over 34,000. On the evening of September 14, 2011, a pale mist settled across Putnam County. At 10:50 p.m., a lone driver passing by an empty parking lot saw Emily, a 19-year-old student at Tennessee Tech, standing beside a green Ford pickup truck. She had just ended her evening shift at the Jefferson Diner, her worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. The man in the pickup leaned out and said something, though the witness couldn't make out what. Overhead, the dim yellow glow of the streetlights flickered faintly, their reflections stretched across the wet pavement. At that moment, Emily's phone sent out its last known signal near Interstate 40 and then went silent for good. What happened after that would remain one of Cookeville's most haunting mysteries for the next 10 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss new cases like this one. Cookeville, Tennessee, September 14, 2011. A regular night in a small college town quietly shifted into something no one could have predicted. A light drizzle came down, cloaking the sidewalks and roads in a damp chill. It gathered on rooftops and telephone wires, dimming the town's usual rhythm into a slower, quieter pace. At the Jefferson Diner, a local spot popular with both students and long-haul truckers, Emily Grace Walker was finishing up her shift. She untied her grease-stained apron, tucked it neatly into her backpack, offered a warm smile to her coworkers, and stepped outside. The wall clock in the diner showed 10:45 p.m. Outside, the wind carried the last remnants of the rain, sharp and cold. Emily pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. She headed toward the back of the lot, where only a few cars remained scattered under the muted yellow glow of the streetlight. The wet asphalt shimmered like broken glass, casting patches of moving light and shadow. In that quiet lot, Emily's figure stood out. Her hair was slightly damp, and her posture showed the weariness of a long shift. A regular at the diner, driving past the corner near the lot, later told police he saw her near a green Ford pickup, older model, covered in dried mud. Its headlights pierced the mist with a dull beam. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he remembered something about Emily's stance. It didn't look casual. Her arms were stiff, her gaze uncertain, like she was caught between deciding to stay or go. From the direction of the interstate, the low grumble of passing trucks echoed in waves. The parking lot itself was nearly empty, just the steady tap of water on metal. A few tree branches stirred in the wind. That would be the last time anyone saw Emily Walker. At exactly 11:15 p.m., her phone went dark. It was last traced pinging off a cell tower near I-40. No further messages came through. No outgoing calls. No more pings, just silence. Back in town, the night continued. Rain still fell. The streetlights still flickered. Truckers drove past Cookeville without ever knowing what had just happened. But for Emily's family, and the Tennessee Tech community, time split in two. In just a few minutes, a girl who had always come home suddenly didn't. She had vanished, like someone paused her life and removed her from it completely. That night changed everything. The morning of September 15th, soft gray sunlight passed through rain-wet trees along Maple Street. Inside a small house, Linda Walker woke with a tight feeling in her chest. Emily always texted when she got home from work. She hadn't. The bed in her room was untouched. Blankets still neat. No signs she'd come in at all. Her phone? Silent. Not even a good night. Linda called it once, then twice. Each ring went to voicemail. By 7 a.m., her worry had turned into dread. She picked up the landline and called the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. "My daughter didn't come home," she said to the dispatcher. "She's never done this before." Deputy Robert Hayes was the one who answered the call. By 7:30, he was at the Walker home, taking notes at the kitchen table. Emily was 19, a freshman at Tennessee Tech. She had finished her shift at the diner around 10:45 p.m., and after that, no one had heard from her. Hayes walked through her room. On her desk sat her laptop, still glowing in sleep mode. Her wallet, ID, credit card, and passport were all laid out. Everything in the closet was untouched. Doesn't look like she packed to leave, he said under his breath, writing in his notepad. Then he drove to the diner. Emily's silver Honda Civic was still parked behind the building, locked, no signs of damage. No indication she had returned to the car after her shift. That made things even stranger. Hayes immediately requested security camera footage from the diner. Most of it was blurry due to the rain, but there was a small moment that stood out. At 10:50 p.m., you could see Emily leaving the diner. Her outline moved across the frame and toward the parking lot. The footage ended there. And with it, so did any trace of what happened to her next. The headlights of a green Ford pickup flared briefly, and then both figures disappeared into the night. Deputy Hayes began conducting interviews. One name stood out early, George Allen, a regular at the diner. He'd been passing by that same night. I saw the girl standing by the green truck, he told officers. It didn't feel like small talk. Her arms were crossed. She looked tense, kept shaking her head like she was saying no. Allen couldn't hear what they were saying. The rain was too loud, but Emily's expression lingered in his memory. It wasn't the cheerful look of the girl he'd seen serving coffee and joking with co-workers. Something about her looked off. Meanwhile, the sheriff's mobile tech team was working fast. They managed to trace Emily's phone. The last ping came in at exactly 11:47 p.m., hitting a tower along Interstate 40 near Center Hill Lake. It was a chilling discovery. That region was isolated. The woods were thick, the roads poorly lit, and it wasn't the first time someone had gone missing around there. Hayes didn't say it out loud, but he knew. If Emily's phone shut off right after that signal, something terrible might have happened in those woods. Back at the Walker home, Linda sat frozen in her living room, her eyes red, her posture stiff. The silence was overwhelming. On the table beside her sat a cold mug of coffee and a framed photo of Emily in her graduation gown, beaming in the sun. The contrast made the moment almost unbearable. Hayes stood nearby. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a growing urgency. "We're not treating this as a runaway," he told Linda. "This is officially a missing persons case." Right then, he made the call to his superiors. A search needed to begin immediately, within a 5-mile radius of both the parking lot and the lake. A full operation. The first lines of the official report were typed up. Emily Grace Walker. Missing person. Potential abduction. Less than 12 hours after she was last seen, the investigation had shifted from a mother's worry to a full-blown criminal case. And now everyone in Cookeville began to realize this wasn't just a late-night disappearance. This was something darker. The mystery was unfolding fast, and every hour counted. The following morning, day 2, Cookeville woke to a strange stillness. The trees still dripped with last night's rain. The air hung heavy with cold mist, and even the usual campus sounds at Tennessee Tech felt quieter, more distant. Word of Emily's disappearance had spread. By dawn, the sheriff's office turned into a command post. Deputy Hayes walked in, eyes bloodshot, notes in hand. The directive was clear now. A full-scale search around the diner and the Tennessee Tech campus, starting from the last point Emily had been seen. A K-9 unit was dispatched from the neighboring county. German shepherds and bloodhounds were brought in. One by one, they sniffed Emily's jacket, retrieved from her room, and were led out to search. Officers formed grid lines, moving carefully across the terrain. They combed through bushes and checked every corner of the lot. Police radios crackled. Sirens echoed across Cookeville. The air was no longer peaceful. It buzzed with urgency. Back on campus, students stepped up. Within hours, volunteers gathered near the student center. They printed thousands of flyers showing Emily's photo, her soft features, blue eyes, and that familiar smile. Big, bold letters read, "Missing." Flyers went up fast. On dorm doors. On church bulletin boards. At gas stations, bars, grocery stores. Anywhere they could find space. Emily wasn't just another student anymore. She had become everyone's concern. Just after noon, a new lead surfaced. A local taxi driver, Harold Dixon, came forward. The night before, around 11 p.m., he'd been driving a fare from downtown to the outskirts. Along the route towards Center Hill Lake, he'd seen a green Ford pickup speeding dangerously fast in the rain. He remembered it swerving, crossing into the other lane at one point. "It caught my attention," he said, "because that road's slick when it rains." Whoever it was, they were in a hurry. The detail matched the phone ping time. It aligned with the lake location. Investigators noted the sighting with quiet concern. By mid-afternoon, the search widened. More than 100 students, parents, and local volunteers joined in. Some held flashlights. Others carried walking sticks or brought along their dogs to help move through the woods. It became a community effort, hopeful but tense. As they moved through the forest trails, people shouted Emily's name, but the woods only gave back silence. Some parents held hands tightly, following along the trails with their hearts in their throats. Everyone knew Linda Walker's face by now. Her pain had become theirs. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What if it were their daughter? Night crept in again. Search teams stayed out. At the edge of a dirt path near the lake, officers spotted something just after midnight. Faint tire impressions in soft earth. The marks veered off the main road and curved back toward a tree line. The rain had erased most of the details, but the outline was still visible. A jolt passed through the group. Investigators quickly marked the area with yellow tape. They took photos, drove stakes into the ground, and logged the scene as a possible lead. Day one had ended with no sign of Emily, but now, finally, they had something. A small trace, a direction. Police cruisers rolled away from the lake late that night, red and blue lights pulsing in the dark. Volunteers sat in small circles, their faces tired, voices low. But no one wanted to leave, not yet. Those tire tracks had changed something. This wasn't just a search. Anymore, it had become a race against time. What began as fragile hope slowly shifted into something heavier, a rising dread that this wasn't just a typical disappearance. By the morning of September 16th, as sunlight barely crept over the hills surrounding Cookeville, the Putnam County Sheriff's Office was already crowded. Maps were pinned to walls, files covered desks. Officers moved quietly, faces tired but focused. The day before had yielded no solid answers, and with time slipping away, all eyes turned to the few remaining leads. Deputy Robert Hayes sat with technicians reviewing traffic camera footage from the town's main intersections. Frame after frame played on the screen, grainy and distorted from the rain. Then at 11:20 p.m., a single frame caught their attention, a green Ford pickup. The footage showed headlights cutting through the downpour as the truck passed through an intersection. A few miles from I-40, the license plate was unreadable, the image blurry, but the shape matched the vehicle seen near the diner. This could be it, Hayes said, staring at the screen. Or it could be nothing. The lead felt like a thread unraveling, delicate and unstable. Then, something unexpected. Emily's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Brooks, arrived at the station. Nervous, hands trembling, he handed over his phone. "She sent me this a week before she disappeared," he said quietly. On the screen was a short message from Emily. "If something happens, don't trust anyone." The words hit hard. Investigators sat in silence. What did she mean? Who was she talking about? Daniel explained that Emily had been acting distant lately, jumpy, distracted, often glancing over her shoulder. They had broken up months earlier, so he was confused why she'd text him at all. But now, the message felt like a warning. To detectives, the text added another layer of mystery. It wasn't specific. It didn't name anyone, but it pointed to fear, something Emily hadn't spoken of out loud. Outside the station, public attention was reaching a boiling point. The Cookeville Herald-Citizen ran bold front-page headlines. Missing student, police stumped. Radio bulletins repeated her name across town. At a coffee shop near the Tennessee Tech campus, students whispered theories. Some believed it was a random abduction. Others thought it involved someone close to her. As speculation spread, so did frustration. The sheriff's office felt the pressure. Hayes went back through every detail, witness statements, the grainy video, the tire tracks found near Center Hill Lake. Still, nothing connected. The green pickup could be anyone's, the warning text could mean anything, and the tire impressions weren't matched to any known vehicles in police databases. Late that night, Hayes sat alone in his office. The photo of Emily, taken at her high school graduation, sat propped against a folder on his desk. Her smile in the picture didn't match the cold silence now surrounding her case. Time was moving fast. And hope was growing thin. All they had were fragments. A blurry truck, a vague message, a town full of fear, and Hayes couldn't shake the quiet worry building inside him that this case might never get solved. On day 3 after Emily vanished, the investigation expanded into something much larger. The sheriff's office coordinated an unprecedented search effort. No longer limited to foot patrols or volunteers stapling flyers, they now brought in helicopters, sonar equipment, and divers from Nashville. A large map in the command center showed every location of interest within a 15-mile radius of Emily's last phone signal. Red pins marked intersections, wooded paths, access roads, and lakeside trails. News vans lined the street outside the station. Reporters went live every hour, repeating one line again and again, a peaceful college town now at the center of a potential abduction investigation. Just after noon, the deep thumping of helicopter blades echoed over Cookeville. Infrared cameras scanned from above, covering treetops, empty fields, and back roads leading to the lake. At the same time, sonar equipment was deployed in Center Hill Lake. The water's surface remained calm as sound waves mapped its depths. Divers, dressed in full black gear, slipped into the cold, dark water, flashlights in hand. The town watched in silence. Everyone hoped Emily would be found. But many feared what that would actually mean. Then, something unexpected. About 7 miles from the diner's parking lot, volunteers searching roadside brush found a red jacket. Police rushed to the location. The area was sealed off. Forensics arrived, and when Linda Walker was shown the item, her voice cracked. It was Emily's. The same jacket she wore on the night she vanished. The news spread fast. That afternoon, local channels aired an image of the mud-stained jacket lying on plastic near evidence markers. Some viewers cried, others were furious. But everyone agreed Emily had been there, and someone had thrown that jacket away. The jacket was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Initial test results came back fast, and they changed everything. Besides Emily's DNA, there was something else, a male DNA sample collected from the jacket's collar. The sample was run through the national database, and within 2 days, they had a match, the name James Jimmy. Dalton, a 32-year-old from Rutherford, county with a record for assault and theft. Dalton immediately became the main suspect. Police raided his home in Murfreesboro. Just over an hour from Cookeville, news channels exploded. Suspect identified, and Emily Walker case social media filled with Dalton's face. Some accused, others speculated. Parents in town felt a brief sense of relief. Maybe now there would be closure. But during questioning, Dalton offered a twist. He had an alibi. On the night of September 14th, when investigators confronted James Dalton, he had a simple answer. He couldn't have done it. Because the night Emily disappeared, he wasn't anywhere near Cookeville. He was in custody. Records showed he had been arrested for a bar fight and was booked into a local station around 9 p.m. on September 14th. Detention logs, security camera footage, and guard statements all confirmed it. Dalton remained in a holding cell until 6 a.m. the next day. His attorney quickly accused law enforcement of smearing his client. For the community, it was like a bucket of cold water. Hope had flared when a name and a face emerged. But now, the story shifted again. If Dalton was locked up the night Emily vanished, how did his DNA end up on her jacket? The lab provided a possible answer. The DNA sample was small, trace level. It could have come from indirect contact, shared laundry machines at a laundromat, brushing against the same surface, or even someone else transferring it secondhand. What mattered was this. Dalton wasn't the person they were looking for. He couldn't have been. Once again, the headlines changed. Prime suspect cleared. DNA raises more questions than answers. And with that, public confusion grew. If not Dalton, then who? Why was his DNA on the jacket Emily wore the night she disappeared? And why was that same jacket thrown away along a remote road? Inside the station, Deputy Hayes stood at the whiteboard. It was now covered in papers, printouts, and scribbled arrows. The footage of a green pickup caught on a traffic camera. The odd text to Emily's ex-boyfriend. The statement from the cab driver. The jacket. And now this. An innocent man linked by evidence but ultimately ruled out. The picture wasn't getting clearer. It was getting messier, and time was slipping away. Hayes knew the public wanted someone to blame. Emily's family needed answers, but all the clues so far had led to dead ends. With each passing day, the case twisted further away from certainty. The more they looked, the more the truth stayed just out of reach. That night, the expanded search wrapped up. The red jacket was still the only real find. Dalton's name was off the list, and something shifted in Cookeville. The sense that the person responsible might not be a known threat, that maybe they didn't stand out, that whoever did this had hidden in plain sight. By March 2012, 6 months after Emily's disappearance, Cookeville had returned to its quiet routines. But the unease remained. The lot behind the diner now had brighter lights. Still, locals admitted they avoided walking through it alone, especially when it rained. The campus at Tennessee Tech, usually buzzing with energy, felt a bit more cautious. The initial flurry of media coverage, press briefings, and multi-agency searches had slowed. No new evidence surfaced, no new leads, no arrests. The red jacket became a symbol, not of closure, but of complexity, a moment when hope spiked, only to fall again. In the public's view, the investigation had stalled. Deputy Hayes, who had handled the case from the beginning, was exhausted. He had spent hundreds of hours retracing steps, rechecking cell tower data, and reviewing truck registrations across the state. Nothing led anywhere. One late afternoon, Hayes sat alone in his office, eyes fixed on Emily's graduation photo pinned to the wall. Her smile still seemed alive, but every attempt to find her had ended the same way. Eventually, Hayes filed for early retirement. After a 30-year career, he closed his final case without resolution. The case was officially moved to Tennessee's cold case unit. The files were boxed up and logged. Technicians labeled them and slid them into a cabinet alongside dozens of others, each waiting for a new lead. But for the Walker family, the silence was something else entirely. It was a nightmare that never ended. Linda Walker, Emily's mother, began writing open letters every month. They appeared in the Cookeville Herald and on the Bring Emily Home Facebook page. In them, she called Emily Emmy. She wrote about the apple tree in the yard blooming again, or how the family's cat still slept on Emily's bed. Waiting, her tone was warm, but underneath, the pain remained. She always ended the same way. If anyone knows something, please don't stay silent. Every September, on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, Linda organized a candlelight vigil near the gates of Tennessee Tech. Students, faculty, and neighbors gathered in the cold evening air, candles in hand, softly repeating Emily's name. It became tradition, a quiet way to hold on. But time moved forward. The case faded, from headlines to murmurs, from facts to vague memories. At the campus coffee shop, students warned each other not to walk home alone. Parents told their kids about the girl who vanished, turning her into a cautionary tale. Ask some freshmen today, and they'll say they've only heard pieces of the story, just enough to know something awful once happened here. The file sat in the cold case unit, mostly untouched. There were no updates, no new suspects. When Linda called for information, she was told the same thing. We're still monitoring, but nothing new. Over time, the family understood. Unless there was a scientific breakthrough or a sudden confession, the case would stay quiet. Still, rumors never died. Some insisted Emily was taken by a drifter and moved out of state. Others believed the green truck was sold off by someone local. A few still suspected the ex-boyfriend, despite no evidence. Every rumor stirred emotions, then fell apart. Nothing held. Nothing explained what happened. Meanwhile, Emily's photo stayed up in the Walker home, next to a candle lit each evening. Family members would say, "We don't have a grave, but we have light." In the town's memory, Emily's disappearance became a shadow that never quite faded. The police no longer searched the lake. Reporters stopped calling. Helicopters were gone. But the silence left behind was louder than ever. It suggested something unsettling, that whoever took Emily was still here, somewhere, among them. The case was officially labeled cold from that moment. The search for justice for Emily Grace Walker entered a new phase, one marked by quiet waiting, whispered prayers, and a town left to carry an unanswered question. Then, in March 2020, nearly 9 years after that rainy night, everything changed. On a cool morning near Center Hill Lake, 3 hunters were moving through the woods about 10 miles from the parking lot where Emily was last seen in 2011. They were familiar with the area, but this trail was overgrown, rarely traveled. Sunlight slipped through bare branches as they moved between thick oak and maple trees. One of the men stopped suddenly. Half buried beneath old leaves and loose soil, he noticed something pale. At first, they assumed it was animal remains. But as they cleared away the debris, the shape of a human skull became unmistakable. The forest seemed to go still. They contacted the Putnam County Sheriff's Office immediately. Within the hour, yellow tape sealed off the area. Officers arrived in silence, stepping carefully through the underbrush, scanning every inch of the ground. Near the skull, forensic investigators discovered additional bones, weathered and scattered by time. 2 objects found nearby removed any doubt about the identity of the remains: a faded red Converse shoe, and a small silver bracelet with 3 letters etched on its surface: EGW, Emily Grace Walker. When a photo of the bracelet was shown to Linda Walker, she broke down in tears. No further testing was needed. She knew her daughter had been found, but not whole. News of the discovery spread fast. For a town that had partially moved on, it was a sudden plunge back into grief. Body of student missing. Since 2011 found. Headlines spread across every local outlet. Residents gathered near the forest's edge, standing behind police barriers, watching the scene unfold. Some left flowers, others held each other in silence. For many, Emily's name had become a whisper over the years. Now it reopened like a wound. Officers documented the site with care. Every bone fragment was collected. The red shoe and bracelet were placed into sealed evidence bags. One forensic expert standing at the scene quietly said, 9 years in the woods, and it's still here. That sentence hung heavy in the cold air. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Cameras panned across police cruisers and muddy forest paths. It was chaotic, but it was also sacred ground. For the family, it was a bitter form of closure. They had prayed for a miracle, for a safe return, but now all they had were bones, a faded sneaker, and a bracelet. At a press conference, Linda Walker spoke slowly, voice cracking. I waited nearly 10 years to learn she's gone. But now, at least I can bring her home. For the sheriff's office, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. The case was no longer just about a missing girl. Now they had physical remains, a chance to re-examine everything. That March afternoon, as a soft rain began to fall through the trees, the only thing that felt certain was sorrow. Emily Grace Walker had been found, but she hadn't come home alive. At the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's forensic lab in Nashville, the evidence was processed under bright lights and cold, sterile air. Bags labeled with Emily's name were opened one by one, each item treated with precision and care. Forensic pathologist Dr. Eleanor Price, with over 2 decades of experience, led the team. She paused when she first examined the skull. After all these years, we don't expect soft tissue, she said. But bones still speak, and they did. A fracture ran from Emily's left temple toward the back of her skull, evidence of a heavy blow from a blunt object. The injury alone would have been serious. Then came the second finding. Her neck vertebrae showed distinct grooves. Dr. Price pointed them out. These aren't from animals. These are from strangulation, something like a nylon cord or rope. Emily hadn't just wandered into the woods and died. She had been murdered. Investigators returned to the evidence locker. The red jacket found months after her disappearance was re-examined using advanced technology. Under microscopic analysis, they found thin nylon fibers embedded in the collar. It matched the type of cord likely used in the strangulation. The biggest breakthrough came next: DNA testing of the jacket, and a deteriorated nylon cord recovered. Near the remains revealed multiple male DNA samples. Though degraded by time and exposure, enough genetic material remained to draw a clear conclusion. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't exposure to the elements. It was homicide. The DNA was cross-checked. Through CODIS, the combined DNA index system, there were no matches, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the classification. When the final report was delivered to the sheriff's office, the meeting room went silent. The word homicide was printed clearly at the top. Robert Hayes, though long retired, had been invited to the reading. He sat quietly, staring at the paper in front of him. It was the answer he had worked toward for nearly 10 years, and the one he had hoped they'd never find. Soon after, a press conference was held. Dozens of reporters gathered. Cameras clicked. Microphones pushed forward. A TBI spokesperson read the results aloud. Forensic examination confirms the victim did not die by accident. Cause of death: homicide. Male DNA found on the victim's clothing and nylon cord, source unidentified. In the crowd, Linda Walker listened. Her expression was blank. The last shred of hope that maybe Emily had gotten lost, that maybe she had simply slipped away, was gone. Her daughter had been killed, and the person who did it was still out there. In Cookeville, the impact was immediate. An earthquake of emotion swept through the town. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a murder investigation. In coffee shops, dorm rooms, and Sunday morning pews, the question was everywhere: who did it? Emily's old text, sent to her ex-boyfriend before she disappeared, surfaced again in news segments and social media posts. If something happens, don't trust anyone. This time it didn't read like a vague warning. It sounded chilling and heavy. For detectives, the forensic report had ended the speculation. Emily hadn't wandered off. She hadn't slipped and fallen. This was now officially a homicide. The file was moved out of cold case storage and reassigned to an active investigation team. Every piece of evidence was reviewed using updated technology. The unidentified male DNA, once a frustrating clue, was now central. It could be the key to solving the case, or, if no match emerged, another haunting dead end. That night, Linda Walker sat quietly in her living room, holding an old photo. Emily as a child, smiling with a cat in her arms, pigtails, freckles, a moment frozen in time. The news had brought clarity, but not comfort. Her daughter hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken and left to vanish. Now the world knew it too. The town of Cookeville understood. This wasn't the end of a case. It was the beginning of a manhunt. In early C-21, almost a year after Emily's remains were found, the case was officially reopened by the Tennessee Cold Case Unit detective. Laura Mitchell was assigned to lead the reinvestigation. Mitchell had worked cold cases for 15 years. She was known for her focus, her long hours, and her refusal to let go of unanswered questions. On her first day, she opened the steel cabinet holding Emily's file. The front of the folder was labeled in bold ink, Emily Grace Walker Missing Person, 2011 Homicide, 2020. In a quiet room with humming fluorescent lights, Mitchell read through every detail. Blurry traffic camera stills. Witness statements. Lab reports. She kept one note pinned in her mind. This case wasn't missed because no one cared. It was missed because the tools weren't there. Now they were. Her first step was to reanalyze the phone data from September 14th, 2011. Emily's phone had last pinged at 11:47 p.m. on a tower near I-40. That much was known. But Mitchell noticed something strange. In 2011, the tower data had only been logged, not fully examined. The local police didn't have the tools to interpret it deeply. But in 2021, the FBI had cast the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, experts in signal direction and tower triangulation. Mitchell reached out. Within weeks, a cast team flew from Washington, D.C. to Nashville. In the sheriff's conference room, a large digital map was projected on screen. An FBI technician stood beside it. Each tower connection doesn't just tell us when the phone pinged, he explained. It also gives us direction, strength, and timing. That can show us movement. Everyone in the room watched as data points appeared on the map. One by one, the FBI analyst connected them. The red line started near the Jefferson A Diner. It moved south out of Cookeville, merged onto I-40, and ended near the exact forest edge where Emily's body was found. It was her last journey. Digitally traced point by point, Mitchell sat in silence, then turned back to a 2011 statement. The cab driver who had seen a green Ford pickup speeding toward the same area at the same time. She checked the timeline. The direction, the location, the phone data, it all aligned. Emily had been in that truck. There was no other explanation. In her updated report, Mitchell wrote, "For the first time, we can scientifically confirm that Emily's final movement aligns with the unidentified green Ford pickup seen by multiple witnesses. This is not theory. This is evidence. The report wasn't released to the public right away. But within the department, the shift was immediate. A case once stuck in limbo now had something real. A route, a timeline, and a match between witness testimony and digital proof." Mitchell addressed her team. "This is our turning point. We're not chasing shadows anymore. We have a path, and someone was driving that truck." That night, in her office, she pinned a printout of the digital map to her board. The red line that traced Emily's journey ended in a black dot, where the signal died. Next to it, she placed Emily's school photo, and whispered, "Emily, we finally know where you went." But Mitchell knew the work wasn't over. That red line had to lead somewhere else now, to a person. The cast report became the backbone of the next phase. Investigators began expanding the list of all green Ford pickup owners registered in or around Cookeville in 2011. They cross-referenced names, criminal records, and any links to the lake or wooded areas. The door that had been sealed for nearly a decade was now creaking open, and behind it, something or someone was starting to emerge, but Mitchell wasn't done. There was still the matter of the male DNA collected from Emily's jacket and the nylon cord, found near her bones. For nearly 10 years, the DNA hadn't matched anyone in Codis. But in 2021, science had changed. Tennessee's Bureau of Investigation now had a forensic genetic genealogy unit. They had begun working with labs that could compare DNA. Samples to public genealogy databases like GED Match and Family Tree DNA. Mitchell submitted a request. All stored evidence from Emily's case, every jacket fiber, every preserved trace was packed and sent to the Nashville lab. It began with one delicate step, extracting viable DNA from degraded evidence that had spent nearly a decade exposed to forest elements. And with that, the next door began to open. Technicians worked with care, removing years of moss and mud from the evidence. Using next-generation sequencing, they read hundreds of thousands of genetic markers, cross-referencing each data point against millions of profiles uploaded to public ancestry sites like GED Match. They weren't searching for the killer directly. "We're looking for his relatives." Mitchell reminded her team, voice steady but low. Days passed like tightened wire. Mitchell barely left her office, constantly refreshing her inbox for lab updates. Every hour without news stretched longer. Then, one morning in June, her phone buzzed. The subject line read, "Partial genetic match, Cumberland County." The report showed a 3% match, an extremely distant relation, likely fourth or fifth cousin. But it meant the killer's DNA shared lineage with someone living just an hour from Cookeville. Mitchell pinned the result to the cold case board, already layered with maps, mugshots, and forensic reports. The entire unit gathered around. After nearly a decade, they finally had direction. "We just opened a door," Mitchell said, pointing to Cumberland County. But the genealogists cautioned, at 3% similarity, the trail was fragile. It would take building a family tree backward for generations and forward to the present, spanning centuries of records and crisscrossing branches of ancestry. It would be slow, meticulous, and filled with dead ends. But it was their best chance. When word leaked that investigators were using DNA genealogy, the public's reaction was immediate. The Herald-Citizen ran the headline, "Old Evidence. New Tech. Could this solve Emily's case?" For some, it brought hope. For others, cautious curiosity. Emily's story wasn't a whisper anymore. It was back in the light. Mitchell didn't celebrate. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new hunt. In her report, she wrote one line: "The DNA is no longer a dead end. It's a roadmap," and she believed it would lead straight to the man who drove the green pickup on that rainy night in 2011. Weeks passed. Genealogists pored over digital records, marriages, birth census files. The tree stretched from Cumberland to Putnam and other nearby counties. Distant names began to form closer connections. Generations linked. Finally, one name stood out. David Ross, age 45, Cookeville resident. Lived less than 2 miles from Emily Walker's house. Mitchell's pulse quickened. Ross's vehicle records showed he once owned a 1998 green Ford pickup, exactly matching the model seen on traffic cameras and described by witnesses. A chill ran through her. Nearly 10 years after Emily vanished beside a green truck, they finally had a name. Digging deeper, she found more. Ross was a freelance carpenter. He had no serious criminal record, just minor traffic infractions. But most shocking was what came next. Ross had been a regular at the Jefferson A Diner, the same diner where Emily worked. Former staff remembered him well. He ordered black coffee, sat at the counter, quiet, polite, but always watching. Back then, no one had flagged it. Now those glances felt different. Then came the final detail, the one that turned the room cold. Ross had volunteered in the first week of the search. A review of 2011. News coverage showed him holding a flashlight, walking beside students along the lakeshore. He wore a gray jacket. He smiled in photos. Back then, people saw him as a kind neighbor, stepping up in a time of need. Now, Mitchell saw it clearly. The man who helped search, she whispered, might have hidden her himself. The news spread quickly inside the department. Some officers froze. Others shook their heads. "I remember him bringing water," one said. "He cracked jokes to keep people calm." "I can't believe it." The town reacted just as strongly. Ross had repaired fences, helped elderly neighbors, sat in church pews. He was familiar, quiet. No one suspected a thing. Mitchell knew this moment was delicate. They had solid circumstantial evidence, but they needed biological confirmation. The genealogical match only tied him to the same bloodline. To be certain, they needed Ross's DNA. She ordered covert surveillance. Trash from his home was collected. Cigarette butts, beer cans, a used toothbrush, anything that could hold DNA. Meanwhile, Mitchell sat alone in her office. In front of her were 2 photos, Emily's high school portrait and a still of Ross standing in the crowd of search volunteers. The horror wasn't just what he did. It was that he stayed close. Watched the grief and said nothing. For 9 years, as word of Ross's suspected involvement leaked, social media lit up. Wait, he searched for her? "I've seen him at the grocery store. He helped fix my porch." Cookeville was stunned. Evil hadn't come from the outside. It had hidden behind the most familiar face. Mitchell watched the town react, neighbors whispering, parents looking over their shoulders. But she kept her focus. They weren't done yet. The evidence pointed in one direction. And the final piece, the DNA from Ross's discarded trash, was already in the lab. In her official report to the TBI, Detective Laura Mitchell wrote, "David Ross wasn't a stranger. He was one of us. That's what made him invisible for so long." Emily's case was no longer a cold file gathering dust. It had become a mirror, reflecting how trust in a close-knit community can hide the darkest secrets. The man who once helped hold a flashlight in a search party may have been the same man who extinguished a young girl's light. After identifying Ross as the prime suspect, Mitchell and the cold case unit launched covert surveillance. They knew one wrong move could spook him and risk losing their only shot at closure. A 4-person surveillance team began tracking Ross's every step, quietly observing his small home on Walnut Street, following him to carpentry jobs around town. A nearby van was outfitted with hidden cameras, lenses trained on his driveway and trash bins. At night, officers sat quietly, sipping lukewarm coffee and taking notes in the dark. Ross didn't do anything suspicious. He woke at the same time each morning, grabbed coffee at the same corner shop, spent afternoons sanding cabinets or installing shelves. His evenings were quiet, television, a meal, lights out by 10. His life was so normal it made some of the team uneasy. "Don't let calm fool you," Mitchell told them. "Someone can bury bones in the woods and still wave to their neighbors." After 3 days, the next phase began: trash collection. Under Tennessee law, anything discarded for pickup is fair game for law enforcement. That night, the team moved in. Gloved hands carefully lifted Ross's trash bags and quietly loaded them into evidence containers. Among sawdust and food wrappers were beer cans and a crushed cigarette pack. Each item was individually sealed and sent to the TBI lab in Nashville. Technicians extracted DNA from the can rims and cigarette filters. Then they compared it to the DNA found on Emily's red jacket and the deteriorated nylon cord. The lab fell quiet as the sequencing completed. Then the results came in. Match probability: 99. 9999%. David Ross's DNA was a perfect match. Mitchell gripped the report, her breath caught. For nearly a decade, this case had wandered through fog. Now the fog lifted, and the face behind it had a name, an address, an indisputable biological proof. In an internal briefing, Mitchell stood before the team and the Putnam County prosecutor. She pointed to the caseboard, Emily's smiling photo on one side, Ross's image from the 2011 search on the other. Between them, she pinned the DNA report, highlighted in red. "We have enough," she said. "It's time for an arrest." The room shifted, quiet but heavy with determination. It was time to move from shadows to justice. At dawn on July 17, 2021, armored SWAT vehicles rolled quietly into the quiet streets of Walnut Street. Fog still hung low as officers moved into position. At 5:30 a.m., flashing lights lit up the block. Over a loudspeaker, the voice echoed through the neighborhood. "David Ross, this is the police. Come out with your hands up." Inside the modest house, Ross froze. Wearing worn pajamas, he peeked through the blinds. Outside, red and blue lights filled the street. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape. Some whispered, others just stared. Ross hesitated, but the street was fully sealed off. Rifles aimed. He had no choice. He stepped outside, hands trembling in the morning light. Cold steel cuffs snapped around his wrists. The quiet corner of Cookeville instantly became a statewide headline. "He fixed my roof," one neighbor whispered. He handed out Emily's flyers at the college gates, a Tennessee Tech grad recalled. Who could have imagined? Shock quickly turned to disbelief, and disbelief turned to anger. For nearly 10 years, Ross had lived like anyone else, blending in, fixing porches, attending church, even helping others grieve. Now that mask was shattered. News spread fast. Nashville television stations ran breaking segments. Arrest made in 2011. Cold case of Emily Walker. Photos of Ross being escorted from his home, head bowed, were broadcast statewide. The Tennessean printed, "From volunteer." To suspect, the man who handed out flyers now accused of murder. Reporters rushed to Cookeville. Everyone wanted answers. Each interview brought a fresh wave of horror. Students, neighbors, even retired officers remembered Ross's face, his kindness, his quiet presence. Now those same memories took on a chilling undertone. At the press conference, later that afternoon, Detective Mitchell stood behind a podium. Dozens of microphones crowded in. Her voice was calm but heavy. After 9 years, we can confirm that Emily Grace Walker was the victim of a homicide. Today, David Ross was arrested for her murder. This investigation is not over, but we will not rest until justice is fully served. In the front row, Linda Walker sat silently, clutching her daughter's photo. Tears streamed down her face, but her gaze was unwavering. For the first time in nearly a decade, the silence surrounding Emily's case was gone. Ross was led into the Putnam County Jail. Outside, angry voices echoed, "Justice for Emily! He lied to all of us!" A water bottle hit the side of the transport van as it pulled away. The town was shaken, deeply. If someone like Ross could hide in plain sight for 9 years, what else could go unseen? That day, Cookeville lost the fragile sense of peace it had spent years rebuilding. But something else emerged too, a moment of justice, hard-earned and long delayed. Ross's arrest wasn't just about closing a case. It was about lifting the mask off a man the community once trusted and revealing what had always been there, a killer hiding in plain sight. The interrogation room inside the Putnam County Sheriff's Office was cold and still. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare onto the metal table. David Ross sat with arms folded, his face pale, eyes sunken from a sleepless night. Detective Laura Mitchell entered with the county prosecutor, placing a thick case file between them. Mitchell began calmly. "Mr. Ross, I need you to walk us through the night of September 14th, 2011. Ross glanced at the file, let out a quiet breath, and spoke slowly. "She finished her shift late. I offered her a ride. That's all. I was heading that way anyway. I dropped her off near campus. I didn't hurt her." Mitchell didn't look away. "You say you gave her a ride, but her phone didn't head toward campus. It went straight toward Center Hill Lake. Can you explain that?" Ross looked down. I don't remember clearly. It's been 10 years. The prosecutor opened the file, sliding a page across the table. "Emily's DNA report. Your DNA was found on her jacket, and on the nylon cord found near her remains. Explain that." Ross's shoulders dropped. He said nothing. The silence lingered. Moments later, his court-appointed attorney entered. A silver-haired man, calm but firm. "DNA shows contact, not intent." "Mr. Ross has acknowledged giving Emily a ride. DNA on her jacket doesn't prove murder. There's no eyewitness, no weapon, no confession. This case is based on assumptions." But the prosecutor wasn't moved. He stood slowly, voice steady. "We have more than DNA. We have the green Ford pickup, a match to Ross's truck, seen on traffic cameras. We have a witness who saw that truck that night. We have phone data showing Emily's path matched that truck's direction. And we have the cord used to kill her, with fibers that match her jacket. All of it, together, tells one story." He turned toward Ross. "You didn't just give her a ride. You drove her to the place where her life ended." Ross stared at the table, hands faintly trembling. Mitchell observed closely. A man who'd lived quietly in Cookeville for nearly a decade, now cornered by science and determination. The defense tried to shift focus, pointing to public pressure, a decade of uncertainty, and gaps in direct evidence. But the prosecutor concluded simply, "We don't need a confession. The jury will see the path. They'll hear the science. They'll know what happened." The interrogation ended quietly. Ross was returned to his cell. But for Mitchell, that silence had said enough. By October 2021, just months after the arrest, the Putnam County Prosecutor's Office had become a war room. Stacks of documents covered desks. Red folders labeled "State versus David Ross" prosecutors worked late nights preparing what would be Cookeville's most significant trial in years. Over 600 pages filled the official case file. DNA analysis, crime, scene photos, cell tower data, traffic cam screenshots, and witness statements dating back to 2011. Their goal wasn't just to present evidence. It was to build a clear, irrefutable narrative. They began with key witnesses. First, the diner regular who'd seen Emily next to a green pickup the night she vanished. His testimony linked Ross to the scene. Second, the taxi driver who saw a similar truck speeding toward the lake. Faded memory or not, he remembered a dent on the side, matching Ross's insurance claim from the same week. Then came the expert witnesses. A TBI scientist would explain the DNA link, how genetic material from Ross's discarded beer cans and cigarettes matched the samples from Emily's jacket and the nylon cord. A forensic genealogist would walk the jury through the DNA family tree that led to Ross, and the FBI's CAST team would show the digital map, Emily's phone route, From the Jefferson diner to the lake, perfectly aligned with the path of Ross's truck. The red line on the screen would speak louder than words. Linda Walker, still grieving but strong, attended every meeting. Thin, quiet, but determined. "I don't care if he confesses," she said. "I just want the jury to hear Emily's story." Emily's brother worked behind the scenes, gathering friends to testify about who Emily was. Responsible, focused, not someone who would run away. Outside the courthouse, the town buzzed. Local newspapers published near-daily updates. On social media, justice for Emily pages grew rapidly, but Mitchell and the team knew public support wouldn't win the case. The courtroom demanded precision. Their strategy was clear. Ross lured Emily into his truck, drove her to the lake, killed her, hid the evidence, and lived quietly for nearly 10 years. Every rehearsal was structured. Witnesses were coached to speak plainly. Experts reviewed timelines, maps, and lab reports. The prosecution worked to ensure no contradiction, no gap for doubt. Mitchell served as a key witness herself, explaining how the case had been revived, from cold storage to cell data to the SWAT raid on Walnut Street. Inside the trial prep room, the whiteboard grew crowded with pins, lines, and names. The prosecutor stood before it and addressed the team. "When we step in front of that jury, we're not just presenting facts. We're telling the story of a 19-year-old girl whose life was taken, and a community that waited a decade for justice." Everyone in the prosecution team nodded. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this time, they had science, truth, and quiet determination on their side. As winter arrived in Cookeville, the tension settled like frost over the small town. The leafless oaks outside the courthouse stood still, as if waiting for justice too. Inside a room lined with red-labeled folders, the lead prosecutor closed the last file and whispered, "We're ready." On January 3, 2022, the Putnam County Courthouse became the focus of all of Tennessee. Before sunrise, news vans crowded the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. A quiet line formed at the courthouse entrance. Neighbors, former classmates, local reporters, all gathered for a trial they'd followed for over a decade. The courtroom was packed. Every wooden bench filled. The air was thick with murmurs, pens scratching against paper, and the low whir of broadcast equipment. 12 jurors, selected over weeks, sat in silence. Each knew they carried a town's unresolved grief. In the front row, Linda Walker clutched a framed photo of Emily. Her fingers were tight around the frame. Her eyes, red, tired, but unflinching, behind her. Members of the original 2011 search party filled seats, still stunned that the man who once handed them flashlights now wore handcuffs. The doors opened. David Ross was led in, orange jumpsuit, hands bound, face unreadable. He didn't glance at the gallery, didn't speak, just walked forward and took his seat, breathing heavily. TV cameras zoomed in. At home, Cookeville residents watched in silence. The chief prosecutor stood first. His voice was calm but resolute. The state of Tennessee versus David Ross. He read the charges clearly: first-degree murder and kidnapping. Each word landed like a bell toll. Jurors took notes. Some spectators sat frozen. Others gripped hands tightly in quiet support. Ross's attorney, seated beside him, scribbled in a worn legal pad. He glanced at the prosecution occasionally, eyes wary. When asked to enter a plea, Ross answered, "Not guilty." His tone was steady. But the words seemed hollow. The prosecution's opening statement was brief but impactful. Emily Walker, they said, was a bright student with a future ahead of her, until she trusted the wrong person. They promised science, witnesses, evidence that pointed directly to Ross. He picked her up in his green truck, drove her to Center Hill Lake, and never brought her back. Each sentence was measured, letting the weight settle on the room. The defense, in contrast, urged calm. This case has emotion, but it also has gaps. DNA only shows contact, not guilt. No one saw a crime. There are no fingerprints on a weapon. There is no weapon at all. As day one ended, Ross was led away. Cameras flashed again, and for Cookeville, this was no longer a mystery. It was now a final reckoning. Day 2. Morning light spilled through the tall courthouse windows. The jury returned, notebooks in hand. The judge called for proceedings to begin. The prosecution's first witness was called, a forensic genealogist. She stepped forward, composed and direct. Sworn in under oath, she explained how the unidentified DNA found on Emily's red jacket was traced. It began with a 3% match from a distant relative in Cumberland County, she said. From there, her team built a genetic family tree, combing through birth records, obituaries, and public archives, every branch narrowing to a single name. She pointed at the digital screen. A tree of connections appeared, all leading to one glowing red dot, David Ross. This isn't chance, she said. This is thousands of markers pointing to one individual. The match is exact. The jury was silent, eyes locked on the screen. Some leaned forward. The once distant concept of forensic genealogy now had a name and a face. Next to testify, a TBI DNA analyst. He brought microscopic images and diagrams, showing how DNA had been recovered from beer cans and cigarette butts in Ross's trash. The same DNA was found on Emily's jacket and the nylon cord. It's a complete match, he said firmly. The odds of it belonging to another person? Less than 1 in a billion. That number echoed in the room. A few jurors exchanged glances. One scratched a note, nodding slowly. The defense rose to question. Can you confirm without a doubt that the DNA wasn't contaminated over 10 years in storage? The analyst replied evenly. We followed federal standards, used cross-lab validation, and verified every step. No contamination. The match is valid. It's Mr. Ross's DNA. The room quieted again. Then came the FBI cast expert. Walking briskly to the front, he greeted the jury, then opened a digital map. This, he said, is Emily Walker's final phone route. A red line appeared on screen. From the Jefferson A diner, the line followed the I-40 highway, curving south. Each data ping corresponds to cell towers active that night. He paused, then zoomed in. The red line continued straight to Center Hill Lake. This path wasn't analyzed in 2011, but now it tells us everything. A quiet stir moved through the courtroom. Everyone watched the line. Clear. Sharp final at 11:05 p.m. Emily Walker's phone pinged one final time, just yards away from David Ross's home in the Walnut neighborhood. That detail wasn't lost on the prosecution. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor said, holding up a map. It all aligns. The green pickup truck. The DNA on her jacket, and now the phone signal that tracked her right past Ross's house before she vanished. This is not a coincidence. This is the truth. At the defense table, Ross sat motionless, eyes locked on the table. His orange jumpsuit reflected the courtroom lights, his hands flat, barely moving. His attorney tried to raise doubt. The phone could have been dropped. Someone else could have been carrying it, but the prosecutor didn't let up. Then why was Ross's DNA on her jacket? Why did traffic cameras catch his pickup? Why does every piece of evidence point to him? By now, the jury had been walked through cell towers, genetic trees, and forensic reports. Each fact connected like puzzle pieces, sharp edges, no loose ends. As the day ended, whispers filled the gallery. He's not walking away. In that wood-paneled courtroom, science had spoken. And for the first time in a decade, Emily Grace Walker, through DNA, timestamps, and data, was being heard. Day 3. The courtroom filled again. The mood was heavier now. The jury looked more focused. Reporters sat silent, pens poised. The prosecution called their first direct witness. A woman in her 50s stepped up. She wore a simple gray dress. Her face was drawn, voice shaky but composed. I left the diner around 10:30 p.m. that night, she began. And I saw Emily. She paused. She was standing by a green pickup truck. She looked stressed, clutching her backpack. A man was talking to her. I didn't stop. But I remember the color of the truck. And the man's build. The prosecutor pointed toward Ross. Is the man you saw in this courtroom? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that's him. That's David Ross. You could hear the room exhale. Jurors scribbled notes. Some glanced at Ross, still unmoved. Next was Emily's co-worker from the Jefferson A diner. She was now in her 30s, dressed in a dark business suit. Her voice cracked only once. Emily told me she didn't like Ross. He made her nervous. He'd sit at the counter, just watching her. Once he asked for her number, she said no. He smirked and said, "We'll meet again." After that, she said she was scared of him. The gallery stirred. Linda Walker gripped the frame in her hands tighter. The prosecutor leaned in. So this wasn't random? No, he targeted her. The prosecution's final witness that day drew sharp attention. A man with gray hair. Once part of the 2011 search party, now back in court. "I remember Ross from the search," he said. "At the time, I thought he was just helping. But then his tone shifted. He kept steering us away from the lake. Kept saying we should check residential areas. We circled neighborhoods for hours. Found nothing." He looked toward Ross. "Now I realize. He was keeping us away from the one place that mattered." The contrast hit everyone. Ross, handing out flyers, acting concerned. Now accused of misleading search efforts to buy time. The prosecutor closed the session with calm precision. "You've seen the evidence. But more than that, you've heard the behavior. Ross didn't just interact with Emily, he approached her. Made her afraid. Then posed as a helpful neighbor, searching for the very girl he took." Ross sat stiff in his chair. His lawyer rose again, trying to break the momentum. "These are old memories. From over 10 years ago, influenced by time and media, but the jury's eyes said otherwise. They weren't just hearing stories, they were connecting dots. Ross wasn't just a name in the investigation, he was in the story from the beginning." Day 4. The courtroom was overflowing. Spectators filled every seat. Even the hallway had people watching from screens. The 12 jurors returned. Pens ready. This day would be different. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you've seen the puzzle. Now let's look at the whole picture." He paced slowly. David Ross wasn't just nearby that night. He knew Emily. He scared her. And he picked her up, drove her out of town, and took her life. He let it sit in silence, then continued. He joined the search, shook hands with her family, all while knowing what he'd done. He pointed to the evidence board behind him. DNA, nylon cord, cell tower pings, traffic footage, witnesses, and the family tree that doesn't lie. He stepped back. This isn't built on speculation. This is built on truth. Suddenly, the defense shot up. "Objection, this is emotional manipulation." The judge called for order. When it was the defense attorney's turn, he spoke calmly. "You've heard a compelling story. But the law doesn't punish stories. It punishes actions, proven actions." He looked toward the jury. "There is no confession, no murder weapon, no footage of a crime. That is what this case lacks." He gestured toward Ross. "You're being asked to believe that every coincidence means guilt. That suspicion means certainty. But that's not how justice works." He paused. "There's too much doubt here. And in our system, that doubt means you must say, 'not guilty.'" The courtroom fell quiet again. The weight of the past 4 days pressed down on every wooden bench and chair. Linda Walker held her daughter's photo against her chest. She wasn't hoping for drama. Just clarity. Just truth. And now all that was left was for the jury to decide. Crimes often hide in shadows. That's why we don't rely on guesses. We rely on science. DNA doesn't lie. Cell towers don't lie. And the people who said Ross followed Emily, they weren't guessing. They were remembering, one by one, each piece added to a larger picture. Without cracks, without gaps, the defense pushed back hard. DNA just proves contact, they argued. Maybe she touched Ross during a ride. That green pickup could belong to anyone. And memories? After 10 years, they fade. The courtroom held its breath. The judge, voice firm, banged the gavel again and again to stop the crosstalk. TV cameras panned slowly across the tense room, jurors scribbling. The prosecution steady, the defense frowning, and Ross, eyes cold, hands tightly folded, unmoving. The prosecution delivered their final blow. David Ross fooled this town, but he won't fool you. You've seen the truth, in every timestamp, in every strand of DNA. Now justice for Emily is in your hands. The judge's gavel fell once more, ending a day soaked in tension. But the silence that followed, it lingered. Cookeville waited, holding its breath, unsure where justice would land. The next morning, gray clouds covered the Tennessee sky, mirroring the mood in the Putnam County Courthouse. Inside, The final step began. After closing statements, the judge turned to the jury and nodded. 12 citizens stood and walked out, charged with deciding Ross's fate. Behind the closed door, time slowed. Outside, the room remained still. Reporters whispered. Spectators sat in tight silence. Some bowed their heads. Some prayed. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. In the front row, Linda Walker sat motionless. She clutched a framed photo of Emily so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes fixed on the door as if her gaze could summon a verdict. Behind her sat Detective Mitchell. He had followed this case since it was a cold file collecting dust. His eyes stayed forward. His shoulders sagged under the weight of 10 long years. After 6 hours, the door opened. Everyone stood. 12 solemn faces returned to their seats. The clerk asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" A single voice responded, "We have." The gallery froze. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights. On the charge of first-degree murder, the defendant, David Ross. Guilty on the charge of kidnapping, the defendant, David Ross. Guilty. The word guilty hit the room like thunder. Some gasped. Others cried. Linda collapsed into her son's shoulder. Her fingers trembled around Emily's photo. The sobs that escaped weren't just grief, they were release. After a decade of waiting, justice finally had a name. Ross didn't flinch. He sat frozen, face blank, hands clasped. Knuckles white, his attorney bowed his head, defeated. The prosecutor let out a long, slow breath, as if setting down a burden carried for years. Then came the sentence. David Ross is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The words rang out. Final. Unforgiving. The courtroom stirred. Some clapped. Some prayed. In the front row, the Walkers hugged, whispering, "She has justice now." No sentence could bring Emily back. But the darkness of 10 years had been pierced by truth. Ross, once a volunteer hero, was now a prisoner, led out in cuffs. As he disappeared through the side door, many in the room stood, their eyes mixed with relief, sorrow, and resolve. Outside, the gray sky still hung low. But in the hearts of Cookeville, a quiet light returned. In the weeks that followed, everything in Cookeville changed. At the Jefferson Avenue diner, where Emily had once worked late shifts, residents whispered about the man who passed out flyers, the same man who took her life. Local newspapers called it the betrayal of trust case, because this wasn't just a murder. It was a decade-long deception. Neighbors had shared beers with Ross. Students had searched beside him. And all the while, he was steering them away, protecting himself. Tennessee media ran the story nonstop. CNN, ABC, even the New York Times, cold case solved, the volunteer who hid his crime. Old classmates spoke through tears. Reporters interviewed townsfolk who remembered Emily's smile, and behind every headline was the same haunting thought. They had trusted him. But the Walkers didn't stop at justice. They turned grief into purpose. Weeks after the sentencing, they announced Emily's Light, a scholarship fund for students in criminal justice at Tennessee Tech. At the launch, Linda Walker stood beside her husband, holding a graduation photo of Emily, surrounded by white candles and hundreds of rose petals. "We want Emily's light to guide those seeking justice," she said softly. Dozens of students signed up that day, pledging to carry Emily's name forward. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation turned the case into a statewide training program. Agents called it the Walker Case. They held workshops on cold case strategy, DNA genealogy, and why even the smallest clue matters. One agent said, if we'd thrown away the phone ping or lost the jacket, we'd still be waiting for justice. Every year now, Cookeville holds a candlelight vigil. But since the trial, those vigils changed. They're no longer just about mourning. They're about hope and warning. At the town square, residents write on a large whiteboard, "A cold case never dies. It waits." Until someone listens. At Tennessee Tech, professors still tell Emily's story to every new class. A girl vanishes after work. A green pickup waits in the rain, and a town must learn what it means to pay attention, because in the smallest details, truth hides. In the Walkers' final interview, Linda said, "Ross took our daughter, but he couldn't take her voice." For years I kept hearing her whisper, "Don't give up." Today, I know. It was Emily. The story of Emily Grace Walker and the decade-long cold case that shook Cookeville is more than a courtroom victory. It's a lesson. A reflection of real dangers young women face every day. Late shifts, dim parking lots, that strange feeling we too often ignore. Her story teaches us, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, speak up. Be cautious with trust. Not every kind face is safe. Never give up. Justice can take years, but science and persistence don't forget. If you believe no cold case should be forgotten, if you believe every voice deserves to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Join us in remembering, in listening, and in pushing for truth. Thank you for following Emily Grace Walker's story. We'll see you in the next video, where more truths are waiting to be uncovered.